If it's okay for everyone, I'm gonna get started with our presentation. Um, so here we go. Bear with me or interrupt me if you have some pertinent questions, or I'm not gonna be looking at the chat, so I'll just talk. If there's something you want to know, just unmute yourself and interrupt me at any time. So today I'm presenting a project called Kitoki. What is Kitoki? Kitoki means different things in different languages. So in Lingala, which is the language they speak in the Democratic Republic of Congo, their Kitoki or Kitoko, it means beauty. So it's about creating beauty. If you would go to Japan, their Kitoki means time, or it references time. And if you go to Lithuania, then they would understand that you're meaning difference. So beauty, difference, time, that's kind of like what I've been thinking about. I started thinking about this, yeah. I started thinking about this project from a few onsets. I have a history of creating kind of underground art, but mostly thinking about what are the conditions for an artistic practice to happen. So always thinking a bit outside of the framework of commercial entities, and also thinking of how to make something if there's no funding from the government. So if the government isn't supportive of your practice, or if it's not kind of the trendy thing that everybody's kind of receiving support for. So before I did other projects, which were always about creating a space, so bringing a physical space, and then through a physical space, gathering artists that would use that space, or creating an art collective around some kind of style or some kind of artistic idea. But often I felt like doing these kind of projects, it's kind of becoming more a political thing or a kind of social thing of how to organize it, and or the resources are insufficient to maintain the spaces. So for Kitoki, I thought about how to create a community through their own artwork. So just by presenting something or giving the opportunity to present online and to present someone else's work, and how they can actually benefit from having a platform that presents their artwork in a professional way, and also in local venues. So to actually bring that work not only in the online space, but also at different local venues. So that's kind of the onset of this project. Of course, from there, it's bringing a lot of artists together through their own work that otherwise wouldn't be connected. So I'm thinking from there how to create a knowledge economy. So how to actually share knowledge with each other and start supporting each other in some kind of way by helping each other, working with each other, but also thinking of how can we actually create an equitable society or an equitable form of working together. And in that sense, I'm kind of thinking and always within a certain scope, connecting it to a foundational approach and having in mind the sustainable development goals. These 17 sustainable development goals, out of which I'm kind of in this project focusing on 4 of them. So our first goal that I want to address is quality education. It's the sustainable development goal 4. So how we're doing this, or how I'm kind of approaching this, is by creating skill shares. It's by presenting a form that actually the knowledge which is kind of produced by the participants is shared among the participants. I've been doing this in personally different forms, but one of those forms was teaching Kundalini Tantra Yoga to the Bosangani Dance Festival in Kinshasa. So that's kind of what I can share as knowledge, because I followed a course in becoming a teacher in these kind of practices. Other things that I'm sharing are more choreographic techniques. That's this kind of graph that you see, where I think about how you can actually work with improvisation, create a different form of building an improvisational setting, then actually creating scores out of this between the spectrum of sensuality and working between performing arts, dance, spoken word, and music, and connecting this with certain psychoanalytical concepts. So that's a bit like my own artistic practice that I'm also channeling through this and making that kind of available in a kind of way of, if I know how to do something, how can I make it possible for others? Not trying to save anyone, but actually helping them learn how to create their own work. Also, one of those forms that I have from my education before is videography, and how to create videos in the broad sense of the word, not only narrative film, but different forms of working with video, more based on the tradition of experimental video and performance artists thinking how to work with their body and video as a medium. And of course, like the moment you start to share information or quality information, it's just not about the amount of information, but once you actually know how to do something in an efficient way, or you found some ways that you feel that are valuable, once this becomes shared information, that doesn't follow like the logic of supply and demand. Because knowledge in that way, the more you actually bring it and the more you share it, and the more you copy it from each other, the more it disseminates in society. So it's kind of a different logic than the competitive logic, which is normally prevalent in certain forms of product design. The other thing I'm doing during Kernel is I'm bringing those artists from Kitoki. It's about 130 persons, different artists. Some of them are also collective, so it's a bit more persons. And also towards Kernel, I'm kind of inviting participants to have a short interview, around 20 minutes. Sometimes it goes until 1 hour, depending if it's a lot of questions. And I ask a set of questions which are coming out of psychoanalysis or out of my interpretation of desire and my personal researches and how desire in different parts of the world is interpreted. So through a psychoanalytic lens, but also through a more philosophical lens, and thinking of how to ask those questions to very different kind of humans and threading and weaving a social choreography together. And by doing this, allowing those participants to learn more about themselves and also learn from each other by publishing on transdisciplinary art as a kind of place where you can actually learn about each other. So then for the second sustainable development goal, it's about gender equality. So how I'm approaching this in this project is by creating a video dance festival, out of which you can visit the website kitoki.io. On the gallery, you will find about 127 videos that are there, all by different makers, creating quite a lot of, almost like soon it will be 24 hours of video material all combined since the open call in the end of last year. So that's always open to access, like anyone can propose something within the certain terms and conditions. And then from there, this is like published on our website and it's freely accessible, and also like our local venues where we actually have smaller selections that are presented in local venues. Those venues are also meant to be publicly accessible. Why I'm doing this in that way, why I'm not making NFTs or building this as a kind of like asset that would be kind of for sale, is because that I really think that this approach to gender equality actually works, because it's not about the politics of gender equality, it's actually about access to the language of a body. And the body becomes a human body, still kind of a quite universal way of thinking about things. I'm not talking about universality of the Enlightenment times, but I'm thinking of a different form of finding something that we share, that we can communicate through, and that speaks beyond words. So that also kind of opens up other fields of actually understanding or interpreting each other, or at least sharing some form of what a human experience is in different ways. And also by dancing, the relation to the body is a possibility to actually make that a more empowered body, so that you feel more comfortable about moving and being watched by others when you're actually expressing yourself through your own way of being weird, or exposing what you have to share with others when you don't necessarily put it into words or text. So that's about like equality of gender. Then I started to think, yeah, how can I professionalize this work? So what is a decent work? Artists are often working for free, or they're exploited, or they got into huge study debts, or there's many ways that artists are like trying to cope to the point of selling their own body to just make ends meet. So often artistic work is also during the pandemic, it was seen as one of the types of work which were considered not very valuable to society. So in that sense, I really think about like artists or artistic workers in the broad sense of the word, to actually create decent work environments for them. So this is my approach to this. Like, first of all, is kind of tackling like what happens between poor and rich countries. Most of them are still dollar based. There's some movements on like currencies, but often there's a transfer from low-paid wages to a first world where that kind of surplus is then sold, and that surplus kind of ends up in a few ever-growing companies which just benefit from that wealth transfer. So I'm thinking about how to create something that is a stable currency or some kind of digital asset that is just major five currencies: dollar, pound, Japanese yen, Chinese yuan, and the euro. So to think of something as a kind of basket that is as stable as possible, so that if the world goes through crises, at least that value is a kind of average value. Um, then how you actually get that money out of that system is by work. So not just precarious work, not freelancing work, but actually signing an employment contract with the foundation, which under Belgian terms means that you build up your social protection, or if you're a foreigner, that you get access to actually the country and the migration services because you're actually a person that is creating work. So that's how I think about like fair pay, which has a kind of agreement in Belgium that there are certain levels that you cannot be underpaid, and that you actually have access to health services and all possible ways to be protected while you're actually at work. So this is kind of how I am thinking about what decent work would mean in the 21st century. And then the last SDG that I'm addressing within Kitoki is, of course, there can be more in the further expansion or development of this project on the long term, but this is kind of the initial onset because 17 goals at once is a bit much. But these four are the main that I see befitting to actually build a foundation around, is the idea of limited disparity. So during the pandemic, something extraordinarily happened also in Web3, like it went very, very low and then suddenly it went very, very high. So there's a growing gap between like the persons that became, they called it like the K-shaped recovery. So a lot of countries are still struggling with the pandemic effects on the economical level. A lot of low-end businesses or middle-class businesses have like lost almost everything, and this gets just worse and worse and worse. So a lot of persons are having less and less and less, while another group of persons across the globe are becoming extremely wealthy, and the ones that were already extremely wealthy became even more wealthy. So it's creating a new upper lower class system, which is kind of unseen in the amount of difference. That's kind of new in history that there's been such a gap between the have and the have not. So I'm thinking about which kind of systems can grow. So it's not about how much you have, but how much difference there is in a society, because time and time again, a society which is very poor and very rich is a society full of crime, a society where there's a difference. So not everybody is having the same kind of means, but there's a kind of zone where people feel comfortable. They don't envy each other too much, and they can build a standard of living which is sufficient to be educated and not have to resort to any kind of crime. So that's a kind of experiment that I'm proposing with this technology, which is just a monetary design. So it's thinking about Web3 as a further step into decentralizing this technology, which means anyone who builds an account with us has a kind of ledger. If somebody buys more than 4 times what the poorest person at that moment has, then the surplus is just before being sent already redistributed. So it's before you would even have to think about taxation. It's just in the transaction itself. Also, when you actually want to make a project and you say, I want to make a new artwork, but these other ones doing their kind of crowdfunding are so much more popular. So also between those projects, there is a solidarity. So it's not about being the most to have the best reputation or to be like the one that nobody really likes to be with. It's really creating a solidarity mechanism that has at least a form of redistributing value in a kind of fair way, so that most persons will be able to thrive. Of course, the questions that I'm having with this project is how to solve the freeloader problem, so the ones that don't want to do anything and just wait it out, and also how to think of how to solve the greed problem, how to kind of work in a different way with this knowledge of like, yeah, I just want to go with like the best, and then like all these kind of ways of trying to get around simply saying, okay, if I work hard, it also means that I'm kind of contributing to a greater sense of creating a society where there's an equal flow, that nobody gets way more richer than someone else. And the transaction fees on each transaction within this system are going into a common fund. That common fund can actually become a pool which is larger than 4 times of any action budget or any wallet. But then this fund is used to actually create a threshold in each action. So then when these actions are being supported and funded by contributions, they will reach that threshold, and then that fund will kind of automatically step in and be allocated to those kind of funds. So there's also an incentive to actually work in time and to reach those goals instead of just waiting it out. Now I'm building a Web2 test case of actually building that technology. So that's happening in the .NET Core MVC web application. I can look into this later if you're interested in it, but for the sake of time, I'm just gonna like skip over this now. And then from that first test case, I'm thinking to actually build in a local gallery space a live action role play. So this is already thinking of like how to get out of the web application that is being developed into a real life situation. And also then starting to think about how would that be as a decentralized version, like what would be the Web3 application. That's kind of what my ask is also in kernel, how to learn about those kind of technologies, which kind of tech stack. And there I'm still very unexperienced. I just learned to do development a couple of years ago. So I'm still learning about, I'm still doing my baby steps into development, especially Web3 development. And in that case, I'm really thinking of like, what is the tech stack that I need to learn and who can advise me with that learning process so that the learning process can also become part of that educational sustainable development goal. So how to actually create skill shares around those developments. And this would be like this little map you see here is a first way of thinking how to create stories and then seeing what kind of relations they can produce and how actually a currency, if it would be a flow of something, how it would actually need to flow and how it can actually be managed as a token engineering system. Then the Transdisciplinary Art Foundation, which is kind of like the Mother of God project. So that's the idea of building a public foundation. Currently, we're a small nonprofit association within another nonprofit association, which is for our administration. From there, I'm thinking to actually be the founder of a private foundation, which is different in Belgian law than nonprofit associations. And then you can actually go to the you need to pass through the Ministry of Justice and have a decree by the King of Belgium that you can be a public foundation, which is kind of a larger vessel in the Belgian law, which is really about like safeguarding the transgenerational purpose, so that on a long-term thinking, you can actually be sure that you create something which has a foundation for a specific purpose with a board that governs like the or safeguards that these kind of things are happening for those kind of purposes. Why I'm doing this in that way is because out of my previous experiences of starting commons, which then became a nonprofit association or cooperatives, which then kind of, once they attract enough capital, suddenly are being co-opted by kind of different interests. So I'm thinking really about creating a long-term vision and safeguarding something that can exist within the kind of scope of those sustainable development goals. And public foundations are always for artistic, scientific, cultural, philanthropic. It has a very specific purpose within the legal entities and within the Belgian law, especially before kind of scaling up internationally. Our current partners are a few small galleries. So there's the small gallery in Brussels, a project space in Brussels, where currently there is one of the expositions happening. Then we're going to be hosted in Contredance, which is a more French-speaking organization which has been documenting contemporary dance since the 80s. So it's very nice that they invited us to actually curate a part of our collection. And then in September, we're going to go again to Congo, like the Democratic Republic of Congo, where actually kitoki is going to be part of the Bosangani festival this year. So instead of teaching yoga, I'm going to invite the participants there to see also a very well curated selection. So there's a very different understanding there regarding the human body, regarding nudity, all these things. So we have to always be very mindful of like, how do we present our work in an international context so that it is actually empowering, but also within the restrictions of like the current governments or the kind of cultural mores that persons have, because our intention is to actually empower the local communities instead of creating a huge scandal or something because of what they see on the screens. So if you see yourself also as a venue or as a partner that would like to partner with this kind of video artwork, or in a broader sense with Web3 development and going on that pathway of learning together, that's kind of what we're here for. And this I said already a bit before. So last year we went through building a static website, having an open call for this video dance, and more than I could imagine, people actually applied to this, so I was a bit overwhelmed. So now we're doing the test case and we're in kernel interviewing participants. In the next few months, we're looking and writing funding applications. We're thinking about how to attract sponsoring. And then later this year, in the second half of 2021, oh my God, I spoke the whole time. Then we're basically gonna move into I can't believe I talked so long. So if you want to know more about it, I will post this resources, and I'll post the whole presentation in the chat. And if you want to have an interview, just click on the link and we'll find a moment to schedule one. Thanks a lot, and I apologize for spending so much time on this presentation. I had this presentation as the first time, so obviously it's way too long. Hey, sorry about talking so long. I hope you have an idea of what this is about now. First thing I will do is share the link also, so you can actually look into it later. If you have some quick feedback now, or if you want to talk later, very welcome to listen to your thoughts on this project.
Hi. Well, first, uh, well, that was a very, very well prepared presentation, and I really, really like the name, and the meaning behind kitoki. I found it very, I don't know how to say it, like very wholesome in a way, because it relates to beauty, but it relates to time and it relates to difference. And all of these concepts are connected, like giving you the sense of beauty in the end. Like, okay, there is beauty in difference and there is beauty in time. So I found it really, I liked it a lot. Uh, what I found most, well, something that really caught my attention was this. Uh, Mechanism that you designed on the Kitoki actions and the action fund, I think it was called, and the distribution between all the people. I think I would like to have more time to see how it works and how it relates to the uh, let's say to the more Web2 aspects, like when you have the crowdfundings and all these artistic movements. Because as I understood, I think it connects to the Kitoki actions, but I think I still didn't quite get how they connect to each other. So if you share the presentation, it would be very, very helpful. Like connect those two diagrams. Uh, because I think it's a very interesting mechanism and how it's working and moving. But I would like to really understand the bridge between this more web.
I think everyone should be back. Just a second. Oh, it's doing it. Okay. Awesome. All right. Everyone's back. Thank you so much to all the presenters in session 1.